Hello everybody and welcome to our Wellbeing workshop on mental health awareness. I'm Olivia, your current VP Wellbeing University, and today I am joined with...
Hi, I'm Hanani. I'm one of the advisors at the SU Advice Centre.
And hi, I'm Tina. I'm also an advisor at the SU Advice Centre.
So we'll be talking about a variety of different mental health conditions today. They will appear on the screen before we start talking about them. So if there's any that you would not like to watch, please just skip forward.
And just a quick disclaimer, none of us are qualified mental health practitioners, so if there's anything that you'd like some more information on, feel free to contact us at the Advice Centre. We can send you some resources, and we'll also put some resources at the end of this podcast that will be available on screen.
Okay, so I feel like we look at these statistics every year, but we're going to have like a little rapid fire round of me running through some statistics for you. So in England, it's estimated that 1 in 4 of us will experience a mental health problem. 7.8% of adults in the UK felt lonely always or often. The cost of poor mental health is calculated at 300 billion a year in England, and over 2 million people are on the waiting list for NHS mental health support in England alone. So looking at these statistics, we can see how common mental health struggles really are. What do these numbers make you guys think about when it comes to the importance of mental health, and how do we respond to it?
I think when you hear them rattled off like that, it's really alarming. I mean, as someone whose job is in wellbeing at the moment, I think obviously I understand the magnitude of the mental health crisis that's going on and everything, but just hearing the statistics is such a jarring thing because it shows the magnitude of the issue. And I think it's also not something that people talk about. You'd ever read a statistic and go, this is to do with mental health. You always just think about more the conditions rather than the actual statistics itself. So I think it shows the magnitude of the issue.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably just to put a positive spin on it, it also shows that no matter what you're going through, you are really not alone. There are so many people going through the same 100%. Thing. And I think in a world of social media where, we see little snippets of people's lives, and a quote that I'm always reminded of is, don't compare your everyday to someone else's highlight reel.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy to fall into that and think that, you're the only one going through something and somebody else's life is perfect. And I think that really contributes to the stigma around mental health.
Amazing.
Yeah, so let's talk about stigma, because it's still a huge problem. Where do you think the stigma around mental health comes from?
I think it comes from, I think there's been loads of stereotypes that have existed for a very long time. And, you see these portrayals of people who have mental health problems and mental health conditions on media, whether that's, in news reports or on film and TV. Typically what you see is, people with mental health problems are often linked to, criminal behavior, or they're kind of portrayed in a way where they can't lead fulfilled lives and things like that. So I think that's part of where that stigma comes from. Yeah.
No, 100%. And I think the main thing about it is people just don't talk about it. Do you know what I mean? People almost feel ashamed to talk about it, which I think is where it mainly stems from.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so this one's a little bit more personal really, but have you ever felt judged or misunderstood about your own mental health, and what can we do to challenge that stigma and encourage open conversations?
Oh, 100%. I think being a student at university, it's such a hard thing that everyone's going through. I think everyone is sort of at some point in their university career, they are going to struggle mentally probably, and it's almost as I said, you're ashamed to speak about it. You shouldn't speak about it because you're not going to succeed because you're struggling so much, but it's definitely something that everyone's facing. When I was a student, I was president of Mentality, the Mental Health Society. So this is literally what we tried to do. was break the stigma surrounding mental health, because I feel like everyone talks about physical health. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to the gym today to make myself feel better. But when it comes to mental health, it's like this total thing that people are like, oh, I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it. It makes me like weak almost. Like it makes me more vulnerable to talk about it, which is something that, I mean, personally as well, it's taken me a long time to establish that that's something that I can talk about. I mean, my mother, she's incredible about talking about mental health. We've been raised my whole life to talk about what we're feeling and express our feelings, but it's hard, and especially when
that's
you're
quite rare, I'd say.
Yeah, it's so hard, and especially when you're coming into university, when you almost don't have your security blankets, so you don't have your family, you don't have your friends that you normally have. It's that feeling that, oh, I can't, what if they think bad of me because
you're trying
of
to make
that?
those
Yeah,
first
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I think in coming into this role as well, this was something that I've really tried to do, was do campaigns that make you like feel like you can talk about it, and that there's support here for you to talk about it. But I also think stigma is always going to be there. I don't think in the next coming years it's going to be something that we magically talk about, which is like disheartening and stuff. But as I said, as someone who is in the role always, I still struggle to talk about it. I still struggle to be like open and honest about it completely, because there is that like almost like wired thing that you shouldn't talk about it, you know?
Yeah, I think those conversations are sort of, you know, when you're younger, maybe they're not as open and they're not encouraged, so you almost don't have the language to like express how you're feeling.
Definitely.
And then you have these like things where you say things like, oh, I'm so crazy, or like this person's really crazy, or like, oh, I'm so OCD for things that aren't, you know, related to those conditions.
Definitely.
And then it gives that negative portrayal of what, you know, it is. And I think having those open conversations is so important. And, you know, also listening when somebody's opening up to you and like understanding, because if I tell you I've got a headache, you're gonna tell me to like drink some water or like, you know, get some rest and stuff like that. Whereas like with mental health, you know, I think it's knowing and like looking into like ways that you can support someone and things like that.
I think you're right there. I think a lot of people don't know how to respond. I think, you know, we're
100%.
used to people saying, I've got a stomachache, I've got a headache, and there are classic things that you would recommend, like, you know, drink a glass of water, have a paracetamol. But yeah, I think with mental health we need to kind of educate ourselves to know how best to support people and to support ourselves.
100%. I think it's also like the common sayings like take a breath or like calm down and stuff like that, where it's like I can't in this moment, I can't do that. So I think it is about like listening to what another person needs, like, because everyone goes through mental health conditions completely differently. Like how I react to something will be completely different to how you react to something. So I think it's just establishing as well like what this individual needs. Definitely.
And I think it's not like you're not the expert, you know, you're not a doctor, you know, in the same way with like physical health conditions, like you're not the doctor to make a diagnosis or like know the exact right thing to do, but even knowing the resources that are out there 100%. And you know where you can seek that additional support, which we will be going through in this workshop. But yeah, I think it's knowing that kind of thing to help support someone. It's not about knowing the solution.
100%.
Definitely.
Okay, so on the topic of stigma, we ran a men's mental health campaign called Mention It in November. So why do you think men in particular find it hard to open up about mental health?
I think this leads on really nicely from what we were just talking about, you know, stigma and how difficult it is to have those open conversations. I think historically men are sort of given this idea that they need to be, you know, quite stoic and tough, and they then suppress those emotions. They don't talk about it. They're not open about how they're feeling because they feel like they need to have this like manly exterior almost, you know. So I think that's partly the reason why it's so difficult for them to open up. And there is a stigma around like opening up about how they're feeling.
Yeah, definitely. And I think somehow we've kind of got to a place where we almost champion the idea that being brave is staying quiet, and you know, because you're not outwardly expressing it, it means that you're bravely approaching a situation. But I think we kind of fail to recognize the bravery that it takes to actually stand up and say, I'm struggling.
Absolutely, yes.
Particularly when, obviously, for men, society may kind of imply that the better thing to do is to be quiet, or you know, to keep it in and be manly. It's really brave to actually say, hey, I'm really not okay. And I think a lot of men may feel that, you know, because there's this sort of archaic idea that men are supposed to be the protector, that, you know, they can't go through things themselves. So they might feel that, you know, they need to stand up and say, you know, I'm fine, I don't need any support, and they think that maybe unburdening themselves would be burdening other people. But actually, the ones that love you and care about you will probably recognize that something's going on. You know, if they care about you, they will know if something's not right, and that in itself is a burden. And there's probably a comfort for them in being able to help and being able to offer their support and knowing that you're confiding in them. But it's definitely a societal pressure.
100%. I think this is why it was so important for me and Banner to run this campaign as Wellbeing and Sock Sport, because I think that, as I said again, like, I'm repeating myself now, but like the physical aspect of health is something that seems more stereotypically male to discuss and to talk about. And I think for us, like, we wanted to shed light that you're okay to talk about it. Like, you don't have to be the one that protects the females in your life or the other men in your life. Like, you're okay to talk about it too. And I think it was so important, well, for me specifically, to be able to open the conversation about that and be like, it's okay. Like, it's okay to talk. And obviously with the Movember campaign and everything as well, I think so many people get involved with that. It's such an incredible cause. It was something that we wanted to definitely like highlight and be like, you're raising all this money for Movember, which is great, but are you really thinking about what that means for you and talking about your mental health? I think it's such an important thing, and I think and
I think that was kind of reflected in how well received it was.
Okay, so now we're going to start talking about some of the mental health conditions. The first one we're going to talk about is anxiety. Anxiety is something that so many people face, often quietly. What's the difference between everyday stress and an anxiety disorder?
I think this is like a really important distinction to make. I think we kind of touched on this earlier, that people almost chuck around phrases kind of quite carelessly sometimes. You know, you hear quite often, oh, that's giving me anxiety, or I've got anxiety, when actually people probably just referring to something that's maybe made them feel a bit uncomfortable or given them a bit of stress. But obviously anxiety itself, as a diagnosed disorder, is something that's generally affecting a longer period of time and in more kind of significant ways, in terms of like mental and physical symptoms, and it might stop people from engaging in things that they would normally do, sort of daily activities, connecting with friends and family. So it's kind of at the point where it's really having like a detrimental impact on your life for a long period of time. And it's not just kind of in those times that we might expect anxiety to appear, in, you know, exam periods or periods of general stress.
Definitely.
And Tina, you've sort of touched on this, like, you know, what are some common signs that someone might be struggling with?
I think it's really difficult because everyone will struggle in different ways. Like, no two people are going to have the same signs and symptoms when it comes to anxiety or any other mental health condition. But I think some of the common ones, there's physical and there are like emotional and mental. So physically, things like being like having pins and needles, like being easily irritable, also like sweaty palms, sweaty heads, like headaches, and then on the mental, like emotional side, is not being able to concentrate, like the feeling of being on edge all the time, or almost like overthinking everything that everyone's saying. I think both of them, like the physical and the mental things, go together. So like having a thought, oh my gosh, why did I say that? And then having like really fast heart beating because you're now having anxiety because of that reaction. But as I said, it's different for everyone, and
Yeah,
not everyone's going to have like all of them.
Yeah.
So not everyone's going to have a headache, heartbeat really fast, feeling easily irritable,
Yeah.
like completely sweating and everything like that. No one's going to have all of them. Oh, they might have all of them. They might only have one. They might have multiple. I think it's very almost a common misconception that anxiety looks like this.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to look at. And I think that's
Definitely.
what's so hard about mental health conditions and the stigma. No one knows exactly what people are feeling and what condition is what, because there's no strict barrier that people fitting when it comes to things like this.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it's a really important thing that you said earlier, is that, you know, you might have symptoms or you might feel that you have anxiety, but it's important to kind of go get that kind of professional support. You know, just because you're having certain symptoms, or even if you're not having certain symptoms, you might still, you know, have a condition. So it's important to go get that support from the right people. But just generally, what are some ways to manage anxiety day to day?
I think it's so difficult because I think from another person's perspective, it also, you might not show that you're having anxiety. Like with the really fast heartbeat, like you're not going to see my heart beating really fast. Like I think, and people, as we were saying earlier, like don't feel like they can talk about it. So someone might be the happiest person on earth and be going through like an anxiety attack or something like that, just they're trying to mask it. But I think there's so many different ways to sort of control it. I think almost knowing your limits, like knowing, okay, this situation might cause me anxiety. What am I going to do if that happens?
And kind of taking the pressure off as well.
Yes.
You know, if you know about those situations and they do really sort of make you feel really anxious, maybe taking steps to either make sure you're prepared to go into those situations or just don't put yourself in those situations.
100%.
And you know, that's not always possible, but in those kind of situations it's important to give yourself the grace and the time to you know, cope with those situations.
Yeah, definitely. I think allowing yourself to feel it is something that's so, I think especially for university students, like you're on the go all the time. You need to do this exam, you need to do this, you need to go to this seminar, and then you're like, oh, like for me anyway, like my mental health is something I push. I'm like, oh yeah, I can deal with that later almost. But if you prolong the dealing with it, it's going to be worse. So letting yourself like literally be like, okay, I'm anxious today, and that's absolutely okay. It doesn't make you less of a person because you're feeling anxious today. Like that is like recognizing it in yourself, and because yes, your close friends around you might be able to say, oh, I think, are you okay? Like, are you feeling a bit more anxious today? But only you know, okay, like this might be what this is. But also like your symptom might be something that's never ever been talked about. Like I get sickness when I'm anxious, like I feel really sick, but I sometimes deep down I know it's anxiety, but I think, oh, I've just eaten something bad. Like, do you know what I mean? Like recognizing in yourself
and
what
sort of trusting yourself,
100%.
trusting your instincts, trusting the way you feel,
and giving yourself the time
definitely.
and the space to feel it. Okay, so leading on from anxiety, something that people can experience are panic attacks and having a panic disorder. This is something that I have struggled with personally throughout all my time at university and before, and still now. It's something I'm still working on. And for me, when I have a panic attack, I think now that I've been going through it so long, I've sort of been able to spot my symptoms. So what I experience is I get pins and needles in my hands and my feet. Like I literally can't feel my feet. I have sickness. I feel really sick, and sometimes it leads to sickness and everything. And almost like, it's really hard to explain, but almost like there's a bubble around me and people are moving around me and I can't sort of not hear them, but like they're almost walking slower. It's really a bizarre experience, but that's sort of what I experience. But as we were talking about with all these mental health conditions, that's not the same for everyone. So what are some other signs and symptoms of panic attacks?
I think some of the other symptoms that you can have are things like so chills, or on the opposite end, you could also have like hot flashes. I think there's also this feeling of being almost dissociated from your body. So like things are, like you were saying, like things are happening around you, or like things are happening to you, but you're not quite connected to yourself. I think like a tightness in your chest, like shortness of breath, I think those are pretty like common symptoms that people experience. But like you were saying, you know, I think with all of these, you can have symptoms that may not be something that somebody else or like, you know, the majority of people like experience, but that doesn't mean that it's not like a panic disorder or a panic attack.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think also this is difficult to know your signs and symptoms, because I've had panic attacks where I don't remember it at all. Like, so obviously I was living it, and at the moment I would have been thinking about it, but afterwards I sort of like, it's like my mind compresses it. It's almost like, okay, we're not going to talk about that, we're going to pretend that didn't happen. So it took me a really long time to figure out what my signs and symptoms were, and for me it was almost like trying to figure out the days before. So
leading up to it.
Literally like leading up to it, instead of trying to figure out what I was feeling in that moment. And I think with panic attacks, it's noticing those little bits before, because some people have panic attacks because of certain situations, but personally mine don't come in certain situations. It will almost be like I'm panicking about something that happened 3 weeks ago. Like, so because I think in situations I'm like, okay, cool, this is what we have to do, I'm very like organized and this is the plan of action, and then later on I feel it and I feel, oh, okay, so maybe that was because of that thing that happened 3 weeks ago, because I feel like always people say, so what made you, why did this happen? And I'm like, I don't know. So I think it's something that's really difficult to almost pick out yourself more than just generalize anxiety. So on the like basis of that, so if someone's having a panic attack, what's the best way to support them during and after, do you think?
I think one of the crucial things, and we've said this a lot, that obviously people experience panic attacks in different ways. So one of the first things is, if someone tells you that they're having a panic attack, believe them. You know, it might not look the way that you expect it to look or that you've experienced, but you know, believing them is really important. It obviously depends on kind of the situation that you're in, but if there's a possibility to take them to a quieter space, obviously with their consent, and you know, oftentimes people find breathing exercises quite helpful. I know there's the 4-7-8 breathing method, which is, you know, breathe in for 4, hold for 7 and out for 8. Grounding techniques, so you know, looking at things around you, using the senses, what can you see, what can you touch, what can you hear, and visualization as well, I think, is a tool that some people find helpful. You know, imagining something that brings you comfort or peace, or thinking of a happier time or a happier place. Those things I think have been helpful for some people, but as with all of these things, these strategies and techniques may work for some but not for others. So I think in general, just compassion and understanding and being willing to listen and learn is really key.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think also it's the not being overreacting or being angry if someone didn't tell you they're having a panic attack, because for me, like, this is like quite difficult to talk about. Like, panic attacks are something that I don't really tend to, something I'm working on to talk about a bit more, but my go-to is, okay, I'm going to do this by myself. So I'm going to take myself off and do this by myself, and then obviously as a friend, as a person on the other side, you can be like, oh, I wish you had told me, but it's something that can be really difficult for people to talk about, because it's something that you're in such a vulnerable state. Like, you also can't really sometimes control what's going on, so you don't, also, like, it's almost like, you know, like anxiety. So when you have a hangover and you have anxiety of what happened, it's almost like that, where you don't remember what happened, so then you're worried about what you had said and what had actually happened. So I think also not putting too much pressure on people to feel like they have to tell you. But also, like, what I find really nice is because what I tend to do is tell people after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hey, I had a panic attack yesterday. So I'm a bit like I'm fine, but like blah, blah, blah. Like just a text, like, how are you today? Like that brings me so much like joy that people like care, and they're not like imposing as well. But also like my friends in the past have had like some TV show or a film that I was liking at the moment, Gilmore Girls, like downloaded onto their phones so they could speak to me, but like I could focus on watching Gilmore Girls, and it really like helped to bring me out of the state as well. So I think it's like so different for everyone, but I think it's down to like talking to the person about it too. But yeah.
So, whilst panic attacks may present more kind of visible symptoms, let's talk about something that many people experience and maybe struggle with silently, which is depression. So, depression can show up in different ways for different people. How does depression affect day-to-day life, and what are some signs and symptoms that might be overlooked?
So I think with all the mental health conditions that we've sort of talked about so far, it's really important to kind of distinguish that it's not just, you know, with depression, it's not just feeling sad or upset, you know, about something for like a day or like in the moment or things like that. It really is a condition that affects you and your mood and your behavior for a long period of time, you know, up to like weeks and stuff. And I think it can manifest in like almost like 3 categories of like, you know, symptoms, where it can be behavioral symptoms where you no longer, you know, spend time with like friends and family, you're like really disengaged, you don't do activities that you might have enjoyed before. And I think also like one of the things that can happen with behavioral symptoms is that you don't take care of yourself as well. So like even you know, small things like getting out of bed or like brushing your hair or brushing your teeth, like those things can feel really difficult to do and you might neglect that. And I think with feelings, it can be like physical feelings of like, you know, this overwhelming like sadness and like just feeling really upset all the time. You know, you might cry a lot, or you might not like cry at all. And then you might have thoughts like these mental symptoms of like, you know, feeling like you're not good enough, or that you're a failure, or that nothing good ever happens to you. You almost like minimize all the good stuff and like emphasize all the bad stuff that's happening, or like you think is the bad stuff. So yeah, I think those are some of like the symptoms that can manifest with depression.
100%.
Yeah, definitely. How can friends and family support someone with depression?
I think the main thing is just being a listening ear, like being there for someone, because I think it takes so much for people to talk about it. So just listening, and I think like what you were saying with panic attacks, like believing someone, like believing that this is happening and that this is not something that they're not just saying they're depressed or whatever, because like actually if someone is taking the time to tell you about this, like listening to them. And then I think trying to offer almost engaging people with what they want as well, whether they want practical support, whether they want you to go with them to speak to someone about it, like offering that practical support and just checking in, like checking in on them, like every now and again, popping them a message, going to see them, almost being like, do you want to go for coffee today? Like, should we go out a bit more? And I think it's also important to note that if you're ever like concerned about anyone being on their own, please like call 999 or 111, like make sure that they're safe as well. I think this is a really difficult one, because I think you also need to be mindful of your own mental health as a friend or family member. Like I think this is really hard for someone to almost like, don't take the burden on yourself completely, like take care of yourself as well. I think that's really important, with not being so completely engaged and focused that you're trying to take their burden off them and putting it on yourself. You need to take care of yourself, because if you're not at your best, you're not going to be able to support either. So I think it's so easy for us to be like, well, like personally, oh, I'd rather me feel that than you feel that. But I think it's important to realize that you're not going to be able to support someone if you're not at your best
Yeah.
either.
And I think it's also recognizing, you know, how much you can do as a person to like help someone,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
also like being understanding of, you know, what that person is going through. So I think
Yes.
sometimes with depression, like even if literally everything in your life is perfect and amazing, like
Yeah.
everything's going great, but
Yeah.
like you can still feel these feelings and have these symptoms, and like
Yeah,
making
of
sure that if you
course.
are someone who's supporting, you know, someone who might have depression, is to make sure that you're not almost like imposing this toxic positivity of like, oh, but look at this thing in your life that's amazing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
making sure that you understand that, yes, I understand that things are difficult for you, even though like this is all happening, you know, just
yeah.
recognizing that like it is a condition, and it's not
Yes.
something that can be resolved in like a day just by like
Yeah.
going outside
Yes,
and like, you
100%.
know,
And it all comes from sort of a good place of people
Of course.
trying
Yeah,
to help,
definitely.
but it can definitely come across as kind of minimizing the issue and
Yeah.
kind of trying to rationalize it,
Mhm.
when
Yes.
actually, you know, this is, as you say, like a mental health condition.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be completely rationable.
I
Yeah.
think it's important to remember, like, as someone who's supporting, you are not a professional. Like,
Yeah.
you don't know what is actually going to help them. It's just being there
Yeah.
and being that, like, listening ear, or being that person to be like, oh, do you want to go to the cinema today, and stuff like that. Like, almost, it depends on the person whether they want like physical, like actual, okay, I'm going to come with you
Yeah.
to go to
Mhm.
the doctors to talk about it, I'm going to come with you. Or if they just want someone to be like, oh, should we go for, like, as I said, go for a coffee, should we go on a walk, like, should we see each other, like, do you want to watch a film, you know, like, just also navigating what you think would be best for your friend, because at the end of the day, you know them as an individual too.
Yeah.
You
Definitely.
know what they like and what they like wouldn't prefer, you know.
Yeah.
So we want to approach this next topic with care. So if you need to skip ahead, please do. There will be a timer on the screen as well if you need to skip ahead. So why do you think people hesitate to talk about suicidal thoughts?
I think, again, it surrounds that piece of stigma. I think this is one of the, in my personal opinion, this is one of the main things that people don't talk about, like, at all. I think, again, it's like the weakness of it, and I think it's such a difficult thing that people go through. It's such a difficult topic, and it's something that you're battling with more, like, mentally. Like, this is something that you're struggling with, like, inside. And I think also, like, speaking it into existence makes it real. I think it's so difficult to talk about things anyway, but, like, speaking this into existence, you don't want, an individual might not know what they want. They might not know what support they need, and I think that's so much harder to navigate with friends and family, because I think with this, because it's such a sensitive topic and such a struggling topic, if you say it to your friends, then it almost it more feels like you're a burden on them, a little bit more as well, I think.
So, you know, you've just touched on, you know, friends talking to them and telling them, if someone is feeling this way, what are some steps that they can take to reach out for support?
Yeah, as Liv has said, it's a really difficult one, both to be open about and also to hear. So I think it's as we've talked about earlier, important to recognise that, you know, your mental health is also important when you're supporting somebody. But, you know, if you're going through this, I think is definitely recognising the small steps. So, you know, if you're not ready to open up and speak to someone about it, even just writing something in a journal to kind of process those thoughts. There are text services that, you know, might be easier for some people rather than picking up a phone. So if you text SHOUT to 8528, they're a 24/7 mental health text line, which is a great resource. And we'll also be putting some more resources at the end of the podcast. So yeah, I think you know, we recognize it's difficult to speak about this topic, but often confiding in someone, you'd be surprised in kind of how much that can help. But yeah, we do recognize that it is very difficult, but you know, people care, they want to be there for you, and that no matter how you feel, you're not alone, and people do care, and there are people that want to listen and to help. So I think sometimes just reminding yourself of that can be the most assuring thing.
I think also there are on-campus support as well. So the Wellbeing team, their information will be at the end. They want to help, and they're there to help you. So I think just if you need the support, there are people who care about you here too.
Definitely. Okay, so we've spoken about how people with mental health conditions may feel kind of a fear of being misunderstood, and you know, those fears may be particularly pronounced in mental health challenges that are kind of misrepresented or minimized, and one of those is eating disorders. So what are some common misconceptions about eating disorders, and how do social media and societal pressures contribute to this?
I think there are certain ideals that society and like especially on social media that are pushed on people of what your body should look like. And I think especially on social media there's so much like representation of, you know, different types of bodies, and like, oh, this is like the ideal or the standard and things like that you know, there isn't like an ideal or like standard body type or what you should look like. But I think sometimes on social media there are these trends that are pushed about like certain eating habits or like what you can do to look a certain way. There really is like a preoccupation of like body weight and shape and things like that. And I think with social media, it's important to remember that there are like, you know, filters and editing tools that bombard you with this like unattainable idea of perfection. And I think it's important to like recognize that. And sometimes you see these trends of like, what you can do. And also like sometimes it does also push certain, you know, eating disorders and like, you know, things that you can do towards it. And it's just remembering that what you see on social media sometimes isn't real.
I think with social media there's like two sides of it. So it can be really positive, and there can be some influencers who are really positively talking about like different body shapes and different body types, and highlighting how everyone is incredible, like it, like however you look. And then there's the other side that Hanani was talking about with social media that is really detrimental. Like it's really detrimental it can be for like anyone, not even just people who are struggling with eating disorders. I think TV shows and films portray certain type of eating disorders and not all eating disorders. I don't think there's things that are completely covered, like the whole like spectrum of eating disorders is completely shown and everything. And I think it's such one that again isn't talked about as much. I think eating disorders is something that's sort of, because when you think about mental health conditions you think about anxiety and depression, you don't think about eating disorders as much, and how people are like really struggling, and how that also mentally people are struggling with that, not just like physically. I think
that's I think it's another one that people sort of really minimize and say, you know, oh, you know, why don't you just eat, or you know, why don't you 100%. Stop eating, or what, you know, whatever it is that people, because maybe they don't experience that or struggle with that, there's a misunderstanding of you know, this is a mental health condition. It's not a decision not to eat, for example.
Of course.
There's a real mental health challenge that this person is facing.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's hard to recognize like when somebody is going through
Yes.
with like an
100%.
eating disorder. Like
Very
sometimes
true.
with like with anxiety and depression, because they are just a little bit more talked about, you might be able to pick up on
Yeah.
things. But with like eating disorders, I think sometimes, you know, you don't recognize it because you might think, oh, this person's like, you know, doing this and now they look this way, so you know
Definitely.
that must be
Yeah.
like a good thing, or like, oh, it's a bad thing, but then not recognizing that there might be like an underlying, you know, struggle there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. The same as we've spoken about with obviously the range of mental health conditions that we've talked about. It doesn't look the same for everyone.
No, yeah.
And you know, if people don't present, as you say, with those kind of same physical symptoms or with the same sort of appearance or whatever that somebody
Yeah.
might expect, it doesn't mean to say that they're not experiencing this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think sometimes people think it's quite like food related,
Yes.
when it's actually more like this preoccupation with what you look like and how you should look like. So I think, you know, even habits that you might have that push that, you know, like, oh, I have to like do this to like look this certain way, like
Yes.
that's part
That's
of like
all
an eating
part.
disorder. It's
Yeah.
not just like, you know, food related
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, the mindsets that
Mhm.
people have as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. So finally, let's talk about looking after ourselves, because self-care is not selfish. What do you do to practice self-care?
Do you
Ooh.
wanna take this first?
Sure. I mean, again, I feel like this is maybe the catchphrase of this podcast, is that
Yes.
this will be different for
Everyone.
everybody.
Yeah.
I think sort of personally, I'm a big one for just getting out and moving in some way. So I've always loved dance. So for me, going to a dance class is a great release, and I always just feel great afterwards. I've recently, I don't know whether it's going to stick, but I've recently taken up running. I say running, I mean a light jog. And after those, I tend to feel much better. And you know, even something as simple as like watching TV is a great mental health break for me.
Yeah.
It's a great way to switch off
Yeah.
after a work day. And I think I'm quite a big one for routines as well. I quite
Yes.
like to know kind of, you know, I'm going to come home, I'm going to either have my dinner and then go to a dance class and then come home, read my book for a bit. Reading is another one. So yeah, I think it's going to be different for
Yeah.
Yeah, of
everyone.
course.
Yeah. And I think to build on what you said about switching off, I think that's a really important part of self-care is whatever activity you're doing, whatever works for you, is to remember to switch off. Because sometimes I think you can be doing an activity
Yes.
like watching TV or reading, but then in the back of your mind, you're still thinking about all your worries and like
Yeah.
things that, you know,
Yeah.
might be bringing you down and things like that. But I think it's important to kind of just be very mindful of like the moment that you're in, and like I think that's where some of those grounding techniques come in, just to like put yourself in the present and not in things that happened in the past or like things you're worried about in the future and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think grounding techniques, like when
Yes.
I'm doing whatever it is that I'm doing, is something that I practice quite a lot, just so that I remember, okay, this is where I am and I am fully like switched off. I think journaling as well.
Yeah, I was
like
gonna
that's
say,
that's
I
a
love a
really important
journal.
one. I feel like we run journaling activities all the time. Yeah, I think that's an important one, and it doesn't have to be like a reflection on your day. It can just be like writing down 3 good things that happened to you, or just like 3 things that you
Yeah.
you know want to, that you're looking forward to. And it doesn't have to be like this massive long like journal entry. It can just be like a short, like,
Yes.
this is what I did today, this is what I feel good about, and that can be the only thing that you put down on the paper.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's so important to remember that self-care is a journey. Like, it's such, well, for me, like, my self-care is what I throw out first. Like, if I'm busy, but no, like, it's something that I always forget about, or I'm like, oh yeah, like, instead of like taking that time. But I think what I've been trying to do is like doing little things like journaling every day. But also Sundays being my day. So my day not to think about work, which is such a difficult thing. But like being able to, okay, cool. So today I'm going to like just relax. I'm going to do a Pilates class. I'm going to lie in bed and I'm going to watch TV. Because even just like choosing to stay in bed, like choosing just to like, today I'm just going to like sit here and watch some TV, as you were saying. I think also a big thing for me is spending time with my family and friends. So going back to Wales, like trying to book in a long weekend to just go spend time with my brother, or going to Toby Carvery with my friends. I love a Toby Carvery. I love a Toby Carvery. But even like we're going to the cinema and stuff like that, just, or even like walks. Like
don't
well-being,
underestimate the power of a good walk. You know, I
love, like, obviously I run Wellbeing walk and talks every Tuesday, and selfishly some of that is for me to go on a Wellbeing walk. Like I feel like I need it too. So I think just finding out what works for you. And we also have a Wellbeing workshop on self-care tips already up on the website as well, that Selena, the fabulous Advice Centre assistant, did, and there's some little top tips in there. But please remember that self-care is a complete journey.
And it looks however you want it to.
100%. Yes, so that is the end of our mental health wellbeing workshop podcast. I hope that you enjoyed listening to us yap a bit. We're yappers, so we love a yap. And thank you so much. We are now going to put some wellbeing resources on the screen to end off this workshop. And please know that there are people here to support you on campus, but also off campus. And if you ever need any further support, the Advice Centre are here and they can signpost you as well, but also Wellbeing and everything.
So the Advice Centre, we run weekly drop-ins during term time. You can find the details on the SU website, or you could drop us an email on advice@su.rhul.ac.uk.
Or if you wanted to come see us in person, we're on the first floor of the SU building.
Thank you so much.